Cambria Hopkins, step away from the hamper line.
I carried mail from this office like everyone else on the
The
route.
case says you sold the key and told Jones which boxes it opened.
People keep saying key like that explains every choice after.
This is Cambria Hopkins, a U.S. Postal Service carrier in Clayton, Missouri. Once is a mistake, twice is suspicious. She did this for over a year and left a paper trail and a key for every single one.
You did not just lose trust, you handed it to a check thief ring.
You were making this loading bay sound like every letter here was already stolen.
She believed that deleting the messages would be enough. It was not. Within 72 hours of that interview, federal agents from the United States Postal Service Office of Inspector General had subpoenaed her cellular carrier, recovered 11 months of CashApp transfers between her account and Malik Jones, and matched the serial number on her arrow key to the master accountability log at the Clayton, Missouri post office. 1 year and 1 day in federal prison. $21,635 in restitution, and a $1.2 million check fraud pipeline that began with a single piece of brass and a hand-drawn map of which mailboxes it opened. Quick question before we go any further. Would you trust the person who carries your mail with the master key to your entire street? Drop your honest answer in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. We cover the insiders nobody thought to watch every single week. Cambria Michelle Hopkins was born in October of 1995 at Christian Hospital Northeast in North St. Louis County, the middle of 3 daughters raised by a single mother named Yvonne, who worked overnight cafeteria shifts at SSM Health DePaul. Her father was not in the household. Her grandmother, who lived in a brick 4-family flat on Goodfellow Boulevard, watched her after school. By the time Cambria was 9, she could identify every letter carrier on her grandmother's block by the way they walked. That detail mattered. It would matter for the rest of her life. The mail carrier on Goodfellow was a black woman in her 50s named Miss Pearl, who wore the regulation pith helmet in summer and slipped Werther's originals into Cambria's hand when she ran out to meet the truck. Her older sister used to joke that the only career goal Cambria ever talked about as a kid was being Miss Pearl. She graduated from Riverview Gardens High School in 2014, ranked in the middle of her class, with what her transcript described as strong attendance and quiet leadership in the choir program. She sang second alto. Her senior yearbook quote was a line from her grandmother, "Show up where you said you would be. College was not in the budget." The summer after graduation, Cambria took a job at the McDonald's on West Florissant Avenue, working drive-through and breakfast prep at $6.25 an hour. She moved to a Walgreens cashier position the following spring, then to a Domino's pizza shop where she answered phones and rolled dough. By 2017, she had 4 years of continuous customer service work, no felonies, no debt collections, and a clean Missouri driver's license. She was 22 years old. She was tired of fast food, and she had remembered Miss Pearl. She applied to the United States Postal Service in March of 2017, took the 473 exam at a testing center in Hazelwood, and scored an 89. She was hired as a city carrier assistant in August of that year and assigned to the Maryland Heights Post Office. City carrier assistants are non-career employees. The pay was $17.29 an hour. There were no guaranteed days off. She delivered through ice storms in February and through a heat index of 107 degrees the following July. Her supervisors described her in early evaluations as punctual, conscientious, and easily liked by patrons on the route. One handwritten note from her second year read, "Hopkins finishes her swing on time and asks for additional auxiliary assignments. Recommend for career conversion at next opportunity." She was converted to a regular career carrier in late 2019, given a bid route in Clayton, Missouri, and assigned a uniform allowance, a federal benefits package, and an arrow key. Clayton is not a postal route most carriers would describe as difficult. It sits 7 miles west of downtown St. Louis, an affluent inner ring suburb with a courthouse square, a Washington University adjunct campus, mid-rise apartment buildings, and tree-lined residential blocks of brick Tudor and colonial houses. Cambria's route was a hybrid, a stretch of single-family homes along Wydorn Boulevard, a cluster of apartment buildings on Forsyth. a downtown commercial loop with 16 blue collection boxes between Hanley Road and Brentwood. She walked between 5 and 7 miles a day in regulation Postal Service Oxfords with reflective stripes. She rented a one-bedroom apartment in a complex called Forest Park Southeast for $950 a month. She kept a Nissan Altima with 112,000 miles on the odometer. She sent her mother $300 on the first of every month and called her grandmother every Sunday after 8 p.m. She was 30 years old. She was a federal employee. She had survived 2 probationary years and a pandemic without a single disciplinary write-up. And then she met Malik Jones. To understand what Cambria Hopkins did, you have to understand what an arrow key is, because the United States Postal Service does not advertise it, and most Americans have never heard the term. The arrow key is a small brass key with a triangular bow stamped with the federal eagle. It is sometimes called a master key, though that label undersells it. A single arrow key opens every blue collection box, every cluster mailbox unit, every apartment building parcel locker, and every neighborhood delivery unit on a carrier's assigned territory. In some districts, one arrow key opens hundreds of receptacles. In dense urban areas, one key can unlock the mail for an entire neighborhood. The Postal Service classifies arrow keys as sensitive, accountable items. That means they are checked out, checked in, and logged by serial number every single shift. At the Clayton post office, the arrow key cabinet was bolted to the wall behind the supervisor's desk. Carriers signed for their key at the start of their swing on a paper log, returned it at the end of the day, and were prohibited from removing the key from postal premises overnight under any circumstance. The penalty for losing one was an immediate investigation, a re-keying of every box on the affected route at Postal Service expense, and discipline up to termination. The system worked on a single assumption. The carrier in possession of the key was the person assigned to protect it. 275 million Americans depend on the Postal Service to handle their mail honestly. The service moves 410 million pieces of mail every day, including roughly 33 million paper checks, personal checks, payroll checks, insurance settlement checks, tax refund checks, Social Security checks for residents who never set up direct deposit, business payments to vendors and contractors. The system runs on the same principle that has governed it since 1875. The person carrying your letters is the one protecting them. Federal law treats violations of that principle severely. Title 18, Section 17. 04 of the United States Code makes the theft, sale, or unauthorized possession of a mail key a federal crime punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Title 18, Section 17. 08 criminalizes the theft of mail itself. Bank fraud, under Section 1344, carries up to 30 years per count. Conspiracy charges, under Section 371, stack on top. The Clayton post office where Cambria worked sat on Maryland Avenue, a 2-story municipal building with a customer counter, a retail lobby, and a back-of-house operations floor where roughly 60 carriers and clerks worked overlapping shifts. The accountability log she signed every morning was 8.5 by 14 inches, printed on Postal Service Form 3977, with columns for date, route number, key serial number, signature out, and signature in. For 5 years, every signature she wrote in that book was accurate. The dates lined up, the serial numbers matched, the checkouts and check-ins were clean. Her supervisor, a 31-year postal veteran named Reginald Carver, considered her one of the more reliable carriers in the station. He had no reason to consider anything else. The relationship between Cambria Hopkins and Malik Jones is not fully documented in the federal complaint. What investigators were able to reconstruct from her phone records, his phone records, and the CashApp transaction history is that the two had known each other for at least 18 months before the sale, that they had been in regular text contact, and that Jones had described himself to her as a man who moved paper. In the colloquial sense of his neighborhood, that meant working in altered or stolen financial instruments. He was 34. He lived in a duplex on Bessie Avenue in the Wells Goodfellow neighborhood of North St. Louis. He had 2 prior state convictions for forgery and check fraud, dating from 2013 and 2017. He was the organizer of a small ring that pulled mail, washed checks, and cashed them through what investigators would later describe as a rotating cast of recruited account holders paid $250 per successful deposit. For most of 2022, the ring was constrained by a basic problem. Pulling mail one envelope at a time from individual residential mailboxes was slow, visible, and inefficient. The blue collection boxes mounted on street corners and outside post offices held volume. They held outgoing checks, business payments, paid invoices, tax filings. But the boxes were federally locked, and the only people who could open them were carriers and clerks holding arrow keys. On March 20th, 2022, Cambria Hopkins sold her arrow key to Malik Jones. The exchange happened in the parking lot of a Schnucks grocery store on Clayton Road, 6 blocks from her station. She had finished her shift at 3:47 that afternoon. She had signed her key back into the accountability log at 3:52. She had then walked back to her supervisor's desk approximately 20 minutes later, while Carver was on a phone call with a customer, and removed the key from the cabinet without re-signing the log. She drove to the Schnucks. She handed Jones the key in the front seat of his Dodge Charger, and she did something the federal indictment would later describe as providing the conspiracy with operational intelligence. She told him which boxes the key would open. She named the intersections. She drew, on the back of a Schnucks receipt, a route map. The receipt itself would never be recovered, but Jones photographed it. The image, in low resolution, would later be pulled from his iCloud account during the federal search. For the next 11 months, the ring used that key and that map. Jones paid 2 of his runners, younger men in their 20s, both later charged separately, to pull mail from collection boxes on Cambria's route between the hours of 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., when foot traffic in downtown Clayton was effectively zero. They worked methodically. They emptied a box, replaced the lock, drove to the next intersection. In a single overnight session, they could clear 16 blue boxes and a dozen apartment building parcel rooms. They were not looking for cash. They were looking for paper, personal checks, payroll checks, business checks, insurance settlements, anything with a routing number and a signature line. The checks went to a wash station that Jones operated out of his basement on Bessie Avenue. The ring used acetone and basic stencil work to remove the original payee name and dollar amount from the magnetic ink. They reprinted new figures. They forged endorsements. The bogus checks were then handed to recruited deposit account holders who walked into bank lobbies across St. Louis County and the Metro East, pushed the checks through tellers and ATM envelopes, and walked back out with cash withdrawals against the float. But Cambria Hopkins did not stop at selling the key. Beginning in August of 2022, she started stealing mail herself. The federal complaint describes her method in clinical terms. While casing the morning delivery point sequence for her route, the pre-sorted trays the carriers received from the plant, she would identify envelopes that visibly contained checks. The tells were familiar to anyone who worked the line. The thicker paper stock, the cellophane window cut for the routing number, the return address of a known insurance company, a payroll processor, a state tax office. She pulled them. She put them in her satchel. Later, on the route, she would pull additional checks from outgoing mail in the blue boxes she opened on her own swing. She sold each check to Jones for cash. The CashApp transfers, recovered later, showed amounts of $40, $75, $120, $200. When she did not want a digital record, Jones met her in person and handed her cash in white envelopes in the parking lot of a Walgreens on Forest Park Parkway. On at least 11 documented occasions, Jones paid her in the form of full grocery runs at the same Schnucks where the original key sale had taken place. He walked the store with her. He paid for her cart with one of his recruits' compromised debit cards. The total face value of the checks the ring attempted to deposit reached $1,196,000 by the summer of 2023. Banks flagged most of them. Some cleared. Some moved through the float long enough for the ring to draw cash before chargebacks hit. The actual loss to financial institutions and individual victims after recoveries and reversals would later be calculated at $21,635. That is the figure Judge Ross would order in restitution. $21,000 in actual loss. Against a fraud pipeline, the ring tried to push past $1.2 million. For Cambria Hopkins, the personal take was even smaller. Investigators eventually estimated her cumulative profit from the entire 18-month arrangement, including the key sale, the check sales, the CashApp transfers, the cash envelopes, and the grocery runs, at somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000. $4,000 to $6,000. For her career, for her freedom, for her name. The investigation did not start with a tip from a colleague or a whistleblower at the station. It started with paper. In April of 2023, a small architecture firm in Clayton noticed that a $4,800 check it had mailed to a Kansas City vendor had been deposited in a Wells Fargo account in North St. Louis County, belonging to a person nobody at the firm had ever heard of. The original payee name on the check had been erased and replaced. The signature was forged. The endorsement was unfamiliar. The firm's bookkeeper filed an affidavit of forgery with the firm's bank. Wells Fargo flagged the deposit. A bank investigator pulled the check image and noted obvious chemical washing. Bleached fibers in the payee field. Hand-printed dollar figures inside the original printed box. That single check might have gone nowhere. But within 90 days, 27 similar reports had landed at 3 different St. Louis area banks. All 27 involved checks that had been mailed from blue collection boxes in downtown Clayton. All 27 had been altered using the same wash technique. All 27 had been deposited within a 15-mile radius of the same North St. Louis zip code. The Wells Fargo Fraud Unit referred the cluster to the United States Postal Inspection Service. The case was assigned to an inspector named Daniel Voss, working out of the St. Louis field office. Voss pulled the deposit locations, mapped them, and ran them against known carrier routes. Every single checking instrument that had been altered and deposited originated from outgoing mail along one carrier's swing. The Clayton downtown loop, 16 blue boxes, 1 assigned route, 1 arrow key. The route was Cambria Hopkins's. Voss did not immediately approach Hopkins. Instead, in coordination with the USPS Office of Inspector General, he obtained a sealed subpoena for Hopkins's phone records and a separate subpoena for the CashApp transaction history associated with her registered number. The phone records returned 11 months of recurring contact with a number registered to Malik Jones. The CashApp history returned 97 transfers from Jones to Hopkins, in amounts ranging from $40 to $250, dated across the period of August 2022 through July 2023. Voss then requested mail covers, the surveillance records of the outside of mail pieces handled at the Clayton facility, for envelopes addressed to known forgery victims. The covers confirmed that the missing checks had passed through the Clayton station on dates that aligned with Hopkins's signed shifts. On August 14, 2023, federal agents executed a search warrant on Jones's Bessie Avenue duplex. They recovered acetone, blank check stock, a stencil setup, 3 laptops, a desktop printer with magnetic ink residue, 243 envelopes addressed to residents and businesses of Clayton, Missouri, and a cell phone containing a low-resolution photograph of a Schnucks receipt with 16 intersections handwritten on the back. The receipt had Cambria Hopkins's handwriting on it. The Postal Service had a sample on file. It was the handwriting from her arrow key accountability log. The case file built quickly after the Jones search. Inspectors had the paper, the digital ledger, and the witness. Jones himself, sitting in federal custody on the morning of August 15th, with a forgery rap sheet and a fresh indictment hanging over his head, agreed to a proffer interview through his attorney within 48 hours. Jones described the relationship in plain terms. He named Hopkins. He named the date of the key sale. He named the parking lot. He described the receipt map. He told investigators about the cash envelopes at the Walgreens and the grocery runs at the Schnucks. He admitted that the ring's runners had been pulling mail from the Clayton blue boxes for 11 months, and that none of it would have been possible without Hopkins's key and her map. He provided text message screenshots from his phone showing exchanges with Hopkins. Jones, October 4th, 2022, 11:14 p.m. Got 6 more from tonight pickup. You want cash or app this time? Hopkins, app is fine. Do not send over 150 at once though. Spread it out. Jones, December 19th, 2022, 6:47 a.m. Need you to grab anything that looked like an insurance check today. 2 on the route from Liberty Mutual. Hopkins, I already saw one in the case. I got it. Jones, March 8th, 2023, 9:33 p.m. Schnucks run Saturday morning. I will meet you at 10. Hopkins, make it 10:30. I got my mom coming over after. The Office of Inspector General audited Hopkins's accountability log for the entire 18-month period. 3 separate entries showed time gaps between her end-of-shift check-in and the next morning's checkout that did not match facility security camera footage. On 2 occasions, she could be seen on internal CCTV approaching the key cabinet during a window when she had no logged reason to be there. The financial side of the investigation tightened next. Voss obtained Hopkins's bank statements for the calendar years 2022 and 2023. The deposits told their own story. Her base salary was direct deposited every other Friday. On top of that, a pattern of small cash deposits and CashApp transfers, never large, never round numbers, never on the same day of the week, added up across the period to roughly $4,300 in unaccounted income. The grocery payments did not appear in the bank records at all because they had never touched her accounts. The Schnucks loyalty card she used did. The same card had been linked on 11 separate dates to check out transactions paid for by debit cards registered to other people. The smoking gun, when prosecutors assembled it for the grand jury, was not any single piece of evidence. It was the alignment of 3 things: the key, the map, and her handwriting on both. She had signed the accountability log on March 20th, 2022, returning her arrow key at 3:52 p.m. CCTV showed her returning to the cabinet at 4:16 p.m. The receipt photograph in Jones's iCloud was time-stamped 4:49 p.m. that same afternoon, at coordinates that placed it in the Schnucks parking lot on Clayton Road. 3 minutes of unaccounted access at the cabinet, 1 brass key, 1 hand-drawn map, 11 months of mail. On August 22nd, 2023, 8 days after the Jones search, 2 USPS Office of Inspector General agents and 1 postal inspector approached Cambria Hopkins in the staff parking lot of the Clayton Post Office at 4:11 p.m. as she was walking from the building to her Nissan Altima. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s named Renata Cole, identified herself, presented credentials, and asked Hopkins if she would speak with them in a conference room inside the federal building 3 blocks away. Hopkins agreed. The interview lasted 47 minutes. It was recorded. Agent Cole: Ms. Hopkins, do you know an individual named Malik Jones? Hopkins: the name is not familiar. Agent Cole: take your time. Hopkins: no, I do not know him. Agent Cole: we have phone records showing 11 months of contact between your registered cell number and a number registered to him. Does that change your answer? Hopkins: I might have texted somebody by that name once or twice. I do not remember him. Agent Cole: we have CashApp records showing 97 transfers from his account to yours between August of last year and July of this year. Hopkins: I get money from a lot of people, friends, family. I do not always know who. Agent Cole: Ms. Hopkins, have you ever removed your arrow key from this facility for any reason? Hopkins: no, never. We are not allowed. Agent Cole: have you ever sold your arrow key or any United States Postal Service property to a third party? Hopkins: absolutely not. The agents asked her about her text messages with Jones. Hopkins said she did not have any. The agents asked her to consent to a review of her phone. Hopkins consented, slid the phone across the table, and unlocked it. The message thread with Jones had been deleted that morning. The metadata showed the deletion timestamp at 9:41 a.m. Approximately 2 hours after a co-worker at the Clayton station had mentioned in passing that some federal people had been by the station the day before asking questions. Agent Cole did not confront her with the deletion in that interview. The agents thanked her for her time and let her go home. 3 days later, on August 25th, a federal grand jury sitting in the Eastern District of Missouri issued a sealed indictment charging Cambria Hopkins with 1 count of conspiracy to commit bank fraud under Title 18, Section 1349, and 1 count of unlawful use of a mail key under Title 18, Section 1704. She was arrested the following morning at her apartment on Forest Park Southeast. We are heading into sentencing now. If you have made it this far, you already know this channel is different. Subscribe so the next case does not slip past you. We break these down every week. Cambria Hopkins' case was assigned to United States District Judge John A. Ross, a 15-year veteran of the Eastern District of Missouri bench. Her appointed defense counsel, a federal public defender named Allison Greer, filed a motion for pretrial release that was granted under standard conditions: location monitoring, no contact with Malik Jones or any cooperating witness, surrender of her passport. The case did not go to trial. The cooperation of Malik Jones, the recovered receipt photograph, the 11 months of CashApp records, the accountability log discrepancies, the security camera footage, and the deleted text messages, recoverable. Federal investigators reminded her counsel, through the cellular carrier, regardless of what had happened to her local copy, made a defense strategy difficult to construct. In August of 2025, Hopkins appeared before Judge Ross and pleaded guilty to both counts. The plea agreement filed in the docket noted her acceptance of responsibility, her lack of prior criminal history, and her cooperation with federal authorities during the pre-sentencing process. Sentencing was held on January 30th, 2026, in Courtroom 10 South of the Thomas F. Eagleton United States Courthouse in downtown St. Louis. The federal sentencing guidelines for her offense level, with acceptance of responsibility and no criminal history, calculated to a range of 0 to 6 months. The government argued for an upward variance, citing the breach of public trust inherent in her role as a federal letter carrier and the scale of the fraud pipeline her actions enabled. Several victim impact statements were entered into the record. One was read aloud in court by a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher named Marlene Whitfield, who had mailed a $4,000 check from a blue box on Wydown Boulevard to her granddaughter's college tuition account in October of 2022. The check was washed, altered, and cashed in a North County bank lobby. The granddaughter's tuition payment bounced. The university applied a late fee, a hold on her registration, and a notation to her account that took 11 months to clear. Whitfield's statement, read aloud, included the line, "I have mailed checks from that blue box on Wydown for 31 years. I trusted the person carrying that mail with my granddaughter's future. I did not know her name. I did not need to know her name. I trusted her uniform." Judge Ross addressed Hopkins directly at sentencing. The transcript records his statement. "Ms. Hopkins, you wore the uniform of the United States Postal Service for nearly 6 years. You were entrusted with a federal accountable item, an arrow key, that opens the mail of an entire neighborhood. You did not lose that key through carelessness. You sold it. You then drew a map of the boxes it would open. You then continued, for nearly a year, to steal additional checks from the very mail you had been hired to protect. You did this for cash, for CashApp transfers, and for groceries. The court finds that the size of the personal benefit you received does not mitigate this conduct. It aggravates it. You sold the trust of every household and business on your route for a price that no honest person in this courtroom would consider adequate compensation for a single shift's work." He sentenced her to 1 year and 1 day in federal prison. The additional day was a strategic addition that, under Bureau of Prisons rules, qualified her for federal good time credit and reduced her actual time served. He ordered restitution in the amount of $21,635, joint and several with Malik Jones. He further imposed 3 years of supervised release and barred her permanently from any future federal employment. Malik Jones, sentenced separately, received 3.5 years in federal custody. Hopkins surrendered to the federal prison camp at Greenville, Illinois, a minimum security facility approximately 60 miles east of St. Louis. She is scheduled for release in the spring of 2027. The Postal Service rekeyed every collection box, cluster mailbox, and apartment parcel locker on her former Clayton route within 72 hours of her arrest. She had handed a criminal ring the literal key to a neighborhood. The cost to the public was a $1.2 million fraud pipeline. The cost to herself was every honest thing she had built since the day Miss Pearl handed her a Werther's original on Goodfellow Boulevard. That story shook me, but the case on the right-hand side is even more outrageous. Click it now.